A little pleasure in life is being able to say, God no, when people ask me if I'm Brook Lopez. Karma quickly comes back around when they insist I must be him, as if there's no obvious alternative. Guess what I'm saying is, I wish we had more nationally televised games last year.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. Today we are looking at the Milwaukee Bucks and their season preview. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. To talk about the Milwaukee Bucks, I am joined by a writer who was over last year in Milwaukee to see that huge season from the Bucks. He is back now in Australia, ready to go to the footy tonight. Kane Pitman is here with me. Kane, welcome to the show for the first time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I am ready to go to the footy tonight. That is my big job for the day. Try and get up to Melbourne and beat the traffic.
So we are recording this on Friday here in Australia before the big Geelong-Collingwood game. I'm more focused on Saturday's game myself between the Bulldogs and the Giants, but by the time people listen to this, the results of both of those games will be known. So hopefully both Kane and myself can be celebrating victories. Kane, I'm really tempted with another Australian on the show just to go full Ocker here with speaking, but I've got to keep it more professional for our US audience. Let's talk Milwaukee Bucks, a team who was obviously fantastic last season. Let's get straight into what's happened here with this team and talk about these players. Of course, the big change here is Malcolm Brogdon is gone. They brought in Wes Matthews. Do you think that he just immediately slots in to be that starting shooting guard?
Yeah, I think he will. And the only question would be with Wes Matthews is how many minutes Mike Budenholzer wants him to play through the regular season. Obviously, Wes Matthews is not the Wes Matthews of old anymore. He is aging a little bit and doesn't quite have the same, explosiveness that I guess he had pre-Achilles, which is a while ago now. But I do think that this was a pretty strong contingency from the Bucks when they knew that they were going to trade or get the sign and trade with Brogdon to the Pacers, and then the next day they picked up the guy who was starting for the Pacers in that position. So I do expect Matthews is going to start, and in that role, much like Brogdon, I think he's going to be expected to shoot a bunch of threes and probably not do a whole lot else. And if you compare him to Brogdon, he probably doesn't have that off the dribble ability to finish in the paint like Brogdon does right now.
Well, that's the thing with Matthews. Since that Achilles tear, he has yet to have a top 100 fantasy season. I don't think that's changing this year. His shooting percentages have dropped since that time as well. I don't expect that he's going and playing even the 32 minutes a night necessarily that he played last season. I think it'll be on a smaller amount this year with George Hill coming in and playing more of those minutes. He can be an interesting three-point streamer, but that's more for deeper leagues. But he's going to take some of those minutes here from Brogdon, because a common question that I'll get, Brogdon's gone, so that means that Giannis is going to have to increase his usage and Middleton's going to put all these big numbers up. And I said, no, I think Matthews is going to get a lot of those shots. We're going to see more of George Hill, and it's not necessarily just going to be distributed amongst the other two main guys on the team.
And I don't think when you look at the shot distribution for the Bucks last year anyway, and even Malcolm Brogdon, I mean, he only took 11 shots, which is not a lot. And when you look at the minutes and you talk about the minutes that Matthews might play, I agree with you. I think this is going to be closer to it'll fall somewhere between the 20 and 25, I would guess, because even when you look at Giannis last year, he played under 33 minutes, but during the regular season, runs a deep roster and trusts a bunch of guys off the bench. So, yeah, I think that, as you sort of said, if three-point shooting is something you're after, I think I would expect Matthews is probably going to shoot a decent percentage because, like Brogdon last year, a lot of his looks are going to come in that wide open category just because he is going to be that fifth option with the starters. He should get a bunch of good looks, and I think he was hitting around 40% on those open catch and shoots last year. So he's a guy that can shoot, and I think will be important for the Bucks, and certainly they'll be looking for him to replace some of that production, but he just doesn't have the all-around game that Malcolm Brogdon does at this point.
No, look, he's a different player in that regard. He's not as efficient as what Brogdon was. Brogdon had legendary type efficiency. I think he played about, there was a month during the season where I don't think he missed a single free throw during that time. So Matthews is more of an afterthought, but a guy that, of course, is very far from an afterthought. The reigning MVP in the NBA, Giannis Antetokounmpo, who put up some big numbers last year. I think what we're looking at with him, he was the third ranked player overall in fantasy basketball last season, took big steps up, mainly in his efficiency, as his true shooting jumped from 60 up to 64%. That's hard to do. Mainly on an increase, a wild increase in his 2-point percentage from 55 to 64. That might be tough to continue, but given how good he is, maybe there's no issue there. I guess the thing that everyone wants to know about him is the improvement in 3-point shooting over the second half of the season, the improvement in free throw shooting. Can that stick?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think the big thing is that the way that Giannis is and how hard he works, and it's obviously well publicized how much time he spends in the gym. So I know that he's going to keep shooting them, and Bud is going to continue to tell him to let it fly from three and want him to keep shooting regardless of the results. I think that's played a big part in Giannis feeling confident to take those shots. He has. Not so much in the FIBA World Cup to this point, but the FIBA World Cup is a little bit interesting in terms of obviously using the different ball, the different three-point arc is a little bit closer. There's a few different things there that could contribute to that. But I do think and I do believe that Giannis shooting, somewhere between 30 to 35. Obviously, you would love it to climb above 35, but I don't think it's unrealistic. 30 to 35% on, three to four attempts per game, because the big thing is, that he's going to be shooting open threes because teams are just not going to be willing to guard him right out to the perimeter and let him get right by them. So it'll be interesting. I think numbers-wise across the board, you can expect that Giannis is going to have similar numbers. Obviously, the points didn't take a big jump from the season before. The rebounding obviously was a factor, and I think Brook Lopez was a big part of that, who he's going to be back with the Bucks. So I would expect really big rebounding numbers again from Giannis, and the assists. He just becomes a better passer. Year after year, he becomes a better passer. He sees the floor better, and he seems to make the right decisions. So the assists, at minimum, I think this is a guy that's going to get at least 5.9 last year. I would not be surprised to see that take another jump.
The rebounding is huge, and Brook Lopez is the reason there, because he just clears space for these guys. Anyone who plays with Brook Lopez sees their rebound numbers go up. Over the second half of last season, or the final 34 games of last season, he shot 76 from the line and 33% from three. Overall, he was just 26% from three. So that's what we're hoping for. I agree with you. I think he will be a 30-plus three-point shooter this year. I think he can be 76% from the line, and he's absolutely a fine pick at number one. I'm not that. I don't look at it and go, well, he's going to be a 73% free throw shooter like last season. I think he can get back up into that mid to high 70s. He was at 77 and 76 the two previous seasons, so he can get back to that level. And I think that he's fine if you want to take him at 1, at 2, at 3, at 4, at 5. He's in that mix. All those guys are so really close. Curry, Harden, Davis, Townsend, and Antetokounmpo for that number one pick. Anyone in there is fine. And Giannis, I do believe, will shoot free throws and three-pointers better this season. I think that the concern we have is the East is a bit weaker, Kane. So those 33 minutes he played last season, there's a chance that could actually drop down a minute. And he had some knee problems last season. Maybe he does sit out a few more games if the Bucks have a comfortable cushion at the top of the standings.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be, from a fantasy point of view, something that you would probably want to keep an eye on. I know from talking with Giannis or directly after Game 6 in Toronto, at exit interviews the next day, Giannis was already talking about some of the lessons he learned from the season before. And part of that was him saying that he thought, not so much minutes-wise, because we know that 32.8 minutes per game is excellent for a star player, but he did say that he thought he went a little too hard and he didn't need to be as aggressive or attacking as he was, particularly early in the season, having not had that long playoff run before in his career, and probably realizing that 2 months of extra basketball takes a toll on your body. So yeah, I would think that he's going to miss some games, and that'll be through management. And also we know that the knee is a thing that's probably not really going to go away. It will cost him a game or two each season. So was he had 72 games last year? I think that 70 mark around there probably will be about where he'll be if everything goes goes to plan, around 70 games. Because, like you said, I'm expecting the Bucks are going to be in a very comfortable position in the 1 seed or the 2 seed, and they'll have that luxury to give him a rest on back-to-backs if they are playing teams that they should beat. So that's certainly something to think about.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely like a bit of a downside there with him, that if they are like flying, maybe he's 31 minutes tonight, and that's still not going to take him out of the top 5, but it is definitely an issue or something we need to concern ourselves with. Now, the most recent memory of Eric Bledsoe in most people's minds, and from even previous seasons, is that he sucked in the playoffs, and that can be true. But he also put up some pretty strong regular season numbers, played just 29 minutes a game last season, was still a top 50 player. 16, 4.5, and 5.5. He had some fluctuating numbers with his efficiency and his steals, but in the end, they were pretty strong. And I think he's probably going to be that same sort of regular season guy again this season. I think that maybe he plays a little bit more than the 29 minutes because we don't have Brogdon around there as a secondary ball handler. George Hill's going to have to take on a lot more of that load, and he's not exactly an Iron Man in terms of staying healthy, and especially at his age. So I think we're just going to get more of the same from Bledsoe. Do you see anything really changing there? Because there's no one coming through to take any of his minutes away.
Yeah, I certainly don't see his numbers dropping. That's for sure. I had a bunch of people that have asked me whether, if they had the choice, whether they would keep Malcolm Brogdon or Eric Bledsoe, if that was the straight choice that you had. And I think that it's interesting comparison, but I will say that I think Eric Bledsoe wins you a bunch more regular season games than Malcolm Brogdon.
Yep.
Obviously, the question is, playoff performance, and clearly Bledsoe has not had a good the last couple of postseasons. But I agree with you. I would expect Bledsoe's numbers to at least hold, and we know again we talk about Lopez in regards to rebounding, and Bledsoe's a strong rebounding guard. He had just under 5 a game. I think that you can expect that again. He is aggressive on the glass, and he's a guy that the Bucks look to start their offense and get that fast-paced offense going between him and Giannis. So he's going to get a bunch of rebounds with this team. And the other thing I will say, he put up big numbers when Giannis wasn't playing. So Bledsoe last year played 78 games. Generally, his health has, touch wood, has been pretty good the last few seasons after some concerns. So if he stays healthy and plays that big amount of games again, and he's only missed 4 or 5 games since coming to the Bucks. That's nearly been 2 full seasons now. So he's stayed pretty healthy. And generally, when Giannis doesn't play, he puts up big numbers, which, as we just said, could happen. Giannis may miss 10 to 12 games.
Bledsoe, I mentioned that narrative about the playoffs and people having it in their mind. His rank on ESPN is 57th, which is absolutely the right spot. Like that's where it needs to be. Yahoo 54, but his ADP on ESPN is 74th. So people are looking at it. He's sitting at the top of the queue, and they're going, "Nah, Eric Bledsoe sucks," and that I think is absolutely the wrong approach to that. So there is value in that. If he starts sliding down, so if you've got pick at 48 and your next one comes back at 60, and Bledsoe's still there, like you grab him. Like there's still value in that, but people are tending to pass over him, even though when ranks are a bit wacky, guys will tend to, the ADP will tend to line up with the rank because guys get auto drafted through mock drafts and all that sort of stuff, but people are actively avoiding Bledsoe, so that's important to note, and I think there could be some value in him in drafts for that reason. Chris Middleton signed a new contract with this team. Again, people seem to be looking at Middleton. He's going to take this big step forward with Brogdon out of there, which again, they're probably the same people who do say to me, hey, the people are going to improve because it's a contract year. This is obviously the opposite situation for Middleton. He didn't play huge amounts of minutes last season, like all these guys, just 31 minutes a night. He was the 58th ranked player last season. Again, I just expect more of the same from what he did last year. I don't really see all that much changing with Brogdon gone.
Yeah, Middleton is such an unselfish player as well. He's not really a guy who, and there has been times when, as I said, the same with Bledsoe, if Giannis isn't playing, you'll see Middleton really step up and he might have that 30, 35 points. But in the general Bucks offense, he's not a guy that's going to really look to take over and start jacking shots. It's not really the way he operates. You saw 15 shot attempts last year is probably where he's going to sit, and that's where he has been for the last couple of seasons. But I think he's definitely a guy that you can expect 18 to 20 points. He's going to get you over five rebounds, around 5 assists, and he's going to shoot well from 3. And he's just a consistent player. Shoots really well from the free throw line. I mean, Middleton is one of the more predictable guys I think on the Bucks roster. He's going to have, and he's certainly streaky at times, but it always just seems to balance out, and he ends up with the same numbers across the board. Anything I would say is 3-point percentage. I'd like to see that get back over 40. Again, he did have quite a cold streak from three through November and December last year, which probably contributed to that. But yeah, Middleton, I'm not expecting that he would be a guy that would have a huge jump in numbers, just because that's not really the way this Bucks offense operates. Outside of Giannis, it's truly is equal opportunity for everyone, and that includes the bench players when they're in with a guy like Middleton or Bledsoe. They share the ball around, and everyone gets their shot. So I wouldn't expect a big jump, but I think you know what you're going to get.
Majority of people, I reckon, listening to this or watching this will say that they would prefer to draft Middleton over Bledsoe. I would much prefer Bledsoe over Middleton. Maybe not much, maybe a round earlier. But there is that difference in opinion between those two guys, even though, again, Bledsoe was the better fantasy producer last season versus Middleton. And again, we don't expect much to change with those guys. What about Brook Lopez? He is back. He was a revelation last season, blocking shots, banging in threes at ridiculous levels. The 55th ranked player last year, 29 minutes a game, 12.5 points, 2 blocks, 2 threes. Yeah, really strong free throw percentage. He did, down the stretch, play 31 minutes a night. I think that the addition of his brother might keep those minutes a little bit lower this season. Yeah, he is not young, obviously. He's 31 years of age, as is Robin, clearly. But I think that we won't need to push him to those 31 minutes a night, which they did after John Henson was traded. I think he stays in that 28 zone. Is that sort of what you're looking at?
25 to 30 for mine sounds about right. I think not only the addition of Robin, but the Bucks do like to go small as well. They play some Giannis at the 5. Ersan Ilyasova also spent some time there. So yeah, I think 25 to 30 is right. Really, all you know, and you can take this to the bank. You know that he's going to be jacking threes. So he's going to get 6 to 7 threes up a game. And the big thing is, he shot 36% last year, which is a good percentage at that volume, but it's not unsustainable. I mean, I don't think that's all of a sudden going to fall off a cliff. So I think Lopez is going to get the threes. The only question will be whether the shot blocking is at the sort of elite level that it was last year. 2.2 a game is obviously, massive from him. He really found a comfortable spot in the Bucks defense under Bud, where he's not really asked to do a lot. He doesn't need to go out to the perimeter. He just drops back in the paint. And it was talked about a lot about the Bucks giving up too many of those mid-range jump shots in the pick and roll. But what it did do was allow Brook Lopez and Giannis to patrol the restricted area, and they were one of the better teams in the league in defending at the rim. So I don't really see that changing. He's going to be down there. He's going to be blocking shots and shooting threes.
George Hill is the guy who's probably going to have to take the biggest step up on this team again with Brogdon going. There is no other real point guard on this team. Bledsoe and Hill are pretty much it, unless I've just forgotten someone completely. No, that's pretty much it, unless we're looking at Frank Mason as a two-way guy. So Hill's going to have to play more minutes this season, I believe. He only played 20 minutes a game last season, really stepped it up in the playoffs. But he's going to take on a little bit of a larger role, but I don't really see him being all that fantasy relevant. But he's going to have to step up this year.
George Hill's interesting. Because I do think the big thing is that Bud is going to want to make sure that this guy is good for the playoffs. Last year, as you said, he was injured. He had a hip complaint coming from Cleveland. He really didn't start out well in Milwaukee.
He was bad.
And then he took an extended time off and came back just before the playoffs. He was playing some unbelievable basketball, and then had a huge postseason off the bench, averaged 11.5 points, shot 41% from three, and really. Every time the Bucks needed just to calm down a little bit, a really solid possession or a big three, it felt like George Hill was that guy. I think that's where the value is for George Hill with the Bucks in those big fourth quarter moments or playoff moments. But as far as an 82 game regular season, I think that they're really going to try and manage this guy through the season. I think that in terms of point guard minutes, you will probably see, again, pending health, you will probably see Dante DiVincenzo play quite a bit at point guard. Generally, you probably might think of him as more of a two guard, but he has played some point with the Bucks. Bud really, really likes him. And I think, as I said, the big thing is that they're just going to want to manage George Hill through the season and make sure that he's healthy and at his best come playoffs.
Dante DiVincenzo is an interesting one because he was surprisingly in the rotation to begin last season, then had that bilateral heel issue that basically ruined his rookie season. He didn't shoot well to begin, but I do agree with you. I think he's going to be in the rotation as the fourth guard from day one, ahead of someone like Sterling Brown, probably ahead of Kyle Korver even at this point, because he can handle it, he can shoot a bit. And you mentioned, I don't know if it's a a redhead alliance between Budenholzer and DiVincenzo, but he loves him, and I think he's going to be in there playing, pretty much most of these games, especially early on.
Yeah, he's someone to watch for sure. And I'm not sure he's a guy that's going to come in and have huge numbers, but it is important to note that right from the word go last year, and Bud is known as a guy that likes his veterans. He likes to ride his veterans a little bit, but right from the start of the season, he had DiVincenzo a lot of the times was the first guy off the bench.
Yep.
And Sterling Brown was the guy coming into the season that I really thought was going to take a big step. But through a few different reasons, Sterling Brown was banged up a little bit as well. DiVincenzo sort of leapfrogged him there. But those two guys are both going to be battling for minutes. But I will say, if DiVincenzo's healthy, I think what he brings defensively, he's super aggressive. I think he's definitely going to play a big role.
I think he's ahead of Sterling Brown, and Brown has some legal issues that still haven't been resolved, I believe, at this point as well, which is something to monitor. Robin Lopez comes in, and you would have to assume he comes in as the backup center, which is probably going to mean that DJ Wilson might be out of the rotation. Now, Wilson was impressive last season after a horrible rookie year, but do you think Lopez is coming in and probably pushing DJ out, or is DJ going to take the Ersan Ilyasova minutes?
Yeah, that's the really interesting one. I mean, Ersan is just such a solid player. I mean, You've seen what he did at the World Cup, against the USA the other day at 24 and 13. So Ersan's just such a solid vet, and Bud loves Ersan Ilyasova. Like, when you talk about guys that Bud loves, Ersan might be the number one guy in the league. So it's hard for me to see Ilyasova going out of the rotation. I do think, obviously, Robin Lopez right now is an NBA rotation player. So I think that Lopez is definitely going to play minutes. The question will be where those numbers sit. The interesting thing to look at with Robin Lopez is, and this probably won't surprise many when you've seen the progression with Brook, but the Bucks have already come out and said, and Robin has said himself, that he's going to be shooting threes. Now, again, I'm not sure how relevant that will be for fantasy purposes, given the minutes I expect to play somewhere between 10 to 15, but it's interesting nonetheless that he might shoot threes. But I think for the Bucks, they probably looked at their roster last year and thought that they were lacking one big backup center, and I think Pau Gasol was to be that guy, but obviously he never really saw the court with the Bucks. So Robin Lopez may be a bit of a counter to Al Horford and Embiid in Philadelphia. A little bit of insurance with potentially foul trouble for Brook. So he's definitely going to play. The DJ Wilson one will be interesting because, like you said, this guy has some serious talent, particularly defensively, and I would really like to see him get minutes, but it's going to be tough to slot him in there.
Brook Lopez attempted 65% of all Brook Lopez's shots last year were threes. Robin Lopez attempted 31 total threes last season. I don't think he's going to get to Brook's level, but I do agree he's going to improve that volume pretty significantly. I wouldn't be surprised if he had 3-4 times as many 3-point attempts this season. How well he hits them remains to be seen, but that is something that will be interesting. That could impact one of his stronger fantasy categories, Robin Lopez, and that is the field goal percentage if he's not hitting those threes at a high level. So that is something at least to look at when considering him for those deeper formats. Paddy Connerton, a bit of a surprising rotation guy last season. Do you think that he maintains that sort of backup three position over someone like Kyle Korver?
Yeah, I do. I'm not sure over Kyle Korver. This is going to be an interesting thing because, again, I think that Kyle Korver is a signing for the Bucks where they looked at what happened in the playoffs and they real struggles from three, and obviously Nico Mirotic was the guy who was brought in and going to be that real shooter. And again, it looked good with Mirotic to start until he hurt his thumb in a really weird incident, and he just never really came back to form. So I think Korver is this year's Mirotic for the Bucks. They're gonna the guy that's going to shoot a bunch of threes when he's out there. But Kyle Korver is not young anymore, and I don't think that Bud is going to want to play him 82 games for 15, 20 minutes a night. Yeah. So I think in that respect, Connerton will certainly be a guy that's going to play a lot. And I feel like I've said this for every player now. I think Bud just loves everyone on the Bucks, but Connerton is one of the guys that he will bring up first, along with, as I said, he obviously loves Ersan and DiVincenzo. Maybe them three are the guys he loves the most. And Pat Connerton, obviously good rebounding for his position. Shot the three reasonably well last year, but I think the wing depth for the Bucks is interesting because behind Chris Middleton, there's a bunch of guys that maybe could play. Maybe Korver could play some three. Connaughton's there. Maybe they'll slide up some guys. Maybe Sterling Brown will play some three. But I do think that if you're going to look at any gap in the Bucks roster, there's certainly a space there for Connerton to play some pretty big minutes. And, he played 20 minutes a game in 61 games last year. So that's certainly not out of the question. But particularly as you mentioned, I'm expecting quite a few blowouts, the Bucks to rest some guys, and then he could really get some good burn.
Do you think Budenholzer runs a 10 or an 11-man rotation?
I would think 11.
Yeah,
He really likes to go deep, and the big part of that is he just likes keeping his starters' minutes down.
Yep.
And with Giannis, and we spoke about the knee concern a little bit, and even Middleton. I mean, he's been healthy now for a couple of seasons, but he has got that hamstring issue, and then Bledsoe's had some injury history, so he just likes to keep the starters' minutes down. And really, we saw last year, even when the Bucks were in close games, and this was one of the criticisms in the playoffs, Bud still went with the same rotation even in the playoffs, and he would take Giannis out the same spots, and he wouldn't play him in situations where you thought you might. So Bud's pretty stubborn like that, and I would expect he's going to run deep in the rotation.
Yeah, that would be my understanding with it as well. That some teams like the Magic, 9-man rotation. I think the Bucks are going to go push to that 11-man rotation, which is going to get someone like Korver and Connerton and Matthews and DiVincenzo and all these guys in there. I think the casualties are probably going to be Sterling Brown and DJ Wilson on most nights, but they're still going to have their opportunities. Even Dragan Bender, who they signed, could potentially have some opportunities in those blowout type situations. That's probably the majority of the guys that we need to talk about here with the Bucks. Just before we get out of here, some value. Brook Lopez, for some God knows reason, I don't know what it is, 129th on ESPN. No reason for him to be drafted there. He's a top 60, 70-ish type of guy, whereas his brother is probably overvalued on ESPN at 181. There just won't be the minutes there for Lopez to get to that value. But otherwise, most people seem to be in the right spot over on ESPN. Kane, thank you for coming on. Now tell everyone where they can find you on Twitter and the work that you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, you can get me on Twitter. It's just @Kane Pitman, and then a bunch of my stuff. It all goes on the Twitter, but I'm doing some stuff for ESPN Australia, and at the moment doing some work with Basketball Australia. So you can find my stuff on there as well. And thanks for having me. I'm happy to come on anytime.
It was good to chat to you, Kane. Go check out his stuff on Twitter. Go check out his writing as well. And good luck for the Cats tonight.
Yes, thank you. Same to you with the Dogs.
And that'll do it for this show. Subscribe to this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. Leave a 5-star review, and on YouTube, give it a comment, give a thumbs up, interact with the show, share it out to people. Follow me on Twitter @RedRock_Bieber and on Instagram @LockedOnFantasyBasketball. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Robin Lopez.